welcome to Frisky, a podcast where we talk everything sexuality and marketing.
With Daniela and Athanasia. Hi there, I'm Daniela.
Hi, I'm Athanasia, and this is our first episode.
It's exciting.
It's Frisky.
We're trying something different today. So we're trying to bring the research we do on marketing and sexuality into this conversational format, chatting about it as we do anyway. But making it accessible to anyone interested in sexuality and marketing or consumer research as well. So yeah, thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening.
Yay, thank you for listening. This is quite different for us because we're used to sharing our research in journal articles, in conference presentations, so mostly talking to each other in quite a formal way. So this is quite different. It feels more personal and conversational.
Yeah.
So hopefully we can start new conversations and we can bring you in.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, this reflects how we talk about research, how sometimes we have read a paper we like or read a book we like, and we mention to one another, have you seen that paper? So we want to make accessible the research that we read by providing sources as well. So if we cite or say something that you're interested in this podcast, you'll find the reference in the comments and in the description of the podcast. And yeah, so kind of being able to talk about research and data in a way that is accessible, but also that reflects the way we actually talk about it in day-to-day life as researchers. So we can also be honest that we started this idea along with the book. Atha, do you want to say more on it?
Yes, so a few months ago we published a book with Daniela and Jacob, and this book is called
I'm holding it right now.
Yes, Daniela is holding it. Our title is Sexuality in Marketing and Consumption, Queer Theory, Feminist Research, and Intersectionality. And this book is with Routledge. Basically, what we did is we invited some of the leading scholars in our field that do research around sexuality, marketing, and consumption. And we invited them to contribute a chapter to this collection. And to be honest, we are very proud with the outcome.
Yeah, I think it's a great book that on one hand sort of touches on different expertise, you know, what people do and they're famous for, but is a bit adventurous as well. Maybe that's why it features here Frisky as well. It is a bit adventurous because it touches on ideas that are not exactly mainstream in marketing, but they're quite relevant as well, sort of to try and open up new avenues for thinking. So in our field, we talk a lot about queer theory and intersectionality, but what does it look like when you put that in practice? And in a way, I think it's a great book because it gathers really a community of great scholars that are passionate about marketing and he manages to talk about sexuality in a way that is less stereotypical. So we really go beyond the sex sells sort of conversation, which tends to be the norm. But instead we explore how sexuality pans out in many different ways, right? In day-to-day life of people, consumers, businesses as well. Do you want to say something about the chapters? Because there are a few really good ones, but actually there are many good ones. All of them are good ones.
All of them are amazing and we love them equally.
We're babies.
Yes. We've tried to have different perspectives, have international contexts featured in the book, and also research that is more theoretical and more empirical as well. So hopefully we're trying to get some of the authors to join us on Frisky to discuss their chapters and their research. So that should be quite interesting to bring those conversations here as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like it's something, just looking at the list of chapters, that we can see is how sexuality covers a wide range of themes or topics. So in the book you can see examples of sexuality and health, or representation of sexuality in media, such as the last series of Sex and the City. That was, how was the title exactly? Just Like That. We should know by now. Yeah, Just Like That. But also updated conversations on the LGBT community, for example, and even more curious takes. So, for example, what does it look like, or how does it feel having a Brazilian done, and why a Brazilian is so ethnically linked as a bodily practice, why it's so ethnically linked. So a varied mix of perspectives, which I think gives the idea of how broad sexuality and marketing can be as a topic.
Which is what we want to explore with these episodes as well. We want to bring in new perspectives. Daniela said before that we want to go beyond the sex sells theme, which is the majority of our thinking when we think things like marketing and advertising in relation to sexuality. However, what we've seen from this experience with the book and from our own research projects is that sexuality shapes our lives in many different ways that tend to be more interlinked and complicating than just driving our purchase intentions as consumers.
Absolutely. And in fact, we will invite also people from the industry, sort of sharing research that is done outside of universities as well, just to better understand how sexuality is studied and understood also by brands and marketing agencies. And the question is, Athanasia, why did you get interested, or how did you get interested in the topic in the first place?
Exactly. So today it's just us. So we'll be sharing our own thoughts and experiences.
How did we get frisky?
Yes, with these topics. So for me, I started doing research in this space a few years ago with my colleague and dear friend Carol Zanette. We worked on a project on women's consumption of pornography, which we ended up publishing both in a journal within marketing and also a sociological journal, which was our first home for this research. We looked into this topic because, to me specifically, I felt that the conversations that were happening within those spaces were quite conservative in their understanding of sexuality, and specifically women's voices were not centered in those conversations. It was rather a male-centric perspective of sexuality and pornography consumption, mostly in the literature and especially in our field. So I felt that something was missing, and we could fill that void by actually talking to women about their experiences in an open way and not through a lens of looking at the harm of these practices, but rather explore their relationship with women's sexuality.
Yeah, I remember I joined University of Liverpool that you were working exactly on this, and I remember thinking it was very brave to a certain extent, because there's still a bit of resistance in kind of exploring sexuality in the lives or the experienced life of consumers. There's a sense of intimacy, and maybe, let's be honest, maybe something around stigma as well, around sex and speaking publicly and openly about sex, desire, and sexuality. And I think in our field, we see it by the lack of research, really, in these topics that kind of explore what sexuality is beyond sort of characterizing people as gay or not gay, because let's be frank, that's where most of the mainstream literature stops. And instead there is so much more to say around desire and how it drives people, really. Yeah.
Exactly. In our case, when we would present this research in conferences, the conversation would be mostly around the context rather than talking more in depth in terms of how we can theorize sexuality and consumption and the relationship between the two. And because we were quite younger when we started this research project, it's something that was not necessarily encouraged in terms of branding yourself as a sexuality scholar within the field. But we were quite frisky and we did not listen, and we went forward with this research study. And I'm really proud of this research. It's one of my most treasured research projects, and eventually I think it was the right choice to explore that space and center those voices, because I felt that it was research that had an impact. So I'm quite happy I actually did not listen to people's advice to not work on this space.
Where has been published?
It has been published in Sociology.
We'll link that.
We will. And also in the proceedings of the Association for Consumer Research conference.
Brilliant.
And what about you, Daniela? What inspired you to do research in this space of sexuality and consumption?
I got into this space out of my curiosity for queer theory, and I have been reading loads around it. But starting, from when I was a student myself, discovering the first, texts, or kind of, reading a bit of Butler, but also more recently, The Argonauts, for example, by Maggie Nielsen. That was another great text that kind of pivoted my understanding. So I sort of really got into that world, but I felt it was something I was reading in my personal time, in my private time. It has nothing to do with my professional life. It was not something I could bring at work. And in that sense, I think right now that we're recording this podcast, I hope is really another effort of sort of taking down the wall between private and professional, and sort of show how sexuality is not something that should be confined, in our around private lives, but it is worth of a more public understanding in a way. My love for queer theory was animated by this energy that I felt every time I read a book or one of these texts. I remember reading the Countersexual manifesto by Preciado and feeling so much sense of rebellion and will to carve a space that was not just about being at the margin of societal expectations, in a way of not fitting in. So the whole narrative around queer theory was not about stigma, but rather about going completely against the expectation and the boxing exercise that is done around sexuality. And I felt that so invigorating, felt so elated after encountering some of these texts. And I remember that we were invited to write a paper for a call for papers in marketing theory on hierarchies of knowledge. And we decided to spin it on queer theory. And it was an amazing opportunity we had to map what had been done in the field. And of course, we are by no means the first to think about queer theory in marketing, but there's not much. And I feel like that our paper was good in mapping what was there and sort of suggesting future avenues for research. And that's how I sort of felt it was possible to really bring sexuality into the study, into marketing research, and still from queer theory. And now I'm getting into a very long answer. And from queer theory, I think we can learn the opportunity of theorizing from the perspective of sexuality. So not just to apply theories that are generated outside of sexuality or the study of sexuality to the empirical field, but rather to look at the empirical field and understand something broader about people's identity, really. That was a long one.
No, thank you. This is really inspiring how you came to study these topics. I'm just wondering, did you receive any sort of resistance? How was mentoring for you? Did you hear opinions like, oh, you shouldn't be looking into these topics, or not necessarily?
I remember that when we presented around queer theory, some of the observations, and that to a certain extent they were right, is that is a done and dusted thing, right? So there was nothing else to say, and everything has been queered already, so there's no point of insisting on that, which reflects a bit as academics, our need of finding the new trend as well, tapping into a new theory or a new perspective that is somehow pioneering of something else. But I didn't feel that way, and I kind of went on again because it had a personal meaning, because it meant something to me, and because that observation about everything has been already queered, there's nothing to queer in marketing, in the end wasn't true. Like, mainstream marketing is still very much heteronormative, is very much around understandings of men and women and heterosexuality versus everything else, and also about very heteronormative life trajectories, the understanding of consumers going through, or people going through, jobs and buying a house and getting married and having children, all experiences that are dissipating a bit from what many of us sort of feel in the day-to-day life, for many, many reasons. Like, one of this is economic recession, for example. Mm-hmm. So I think there is a value there. We were lucky to being provided with a space in a way that was really ready to welcome our ideas. And in that case, I think Olga Kravitz from Royal Holloway, University of London, who edited that call for paper, she did a really good job in picking us. Well done, Olga.
And I'm going to give you some insider scoop right now. Mm-hmm. My favorite sentence from that paper is how it ends, which says, luckily, there are more things to queer. And that was Miss Daniela's writing.
Effort to close up the paper in a good way. So just to bring it forward, I think this podcast is a good opportunity to sort of really think about what else is to say around marketing and sexuality, how we can have productive conversations and learn from existing research, as well as to open ourselves up a bit to other perspectives. Something that Athanasia mentioned is that in our book we invited contributions from countries that are not Europe or the US as well, and that is so important because the understanding that circulates right now around sex and sexuality is very much modeled in around our white and very Western systems, and it's so good to learn around other cultures, but also to kind of use other experiences to shape what we, to make sense of what we experience, because we are very much into consuming content that is produced not just in Western worlds, and we're exposed to so much that having that opening up, let's say, to other other countries, other cultures, other understanding of sexuality, I think it gives us way more tools than we already have.
And we also want to bring you in, so please suggest in the comments topics that you would like us to discuss in the next episodes, or potential guests that we can have, both from the industry and also from academia, more from marketing and from media studies, sociology, politics. We would be quite interested to explore these topics from different theoretical point of views and also through different contexts.
Yeah, we have some guests already lined up, so there's a bit of surprise that we'll be revealing every week. But of course, we're more than happy to take some suggestions. And again, as Athanasia said, if you are looking for some resources, we hope that these every episode is basically going to be a bit of a treasure trove of research around the topic that we explore. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much for listening, and tune in next week for our first guest.
Yeah, and go on and feel a bit frisky yourself.